How can you act more competent in the world of diversity? Hi, I'm Monika Hutnik, and I help leaders learn how to lead their international and virtual teams. Together with my team at ETA Leadership and Culture, we make the change happen by means of training, coaching, or facilitation. This podcast, A Step Ahead, has been created for all who want to grow in such an international remote environment, who want to grow as leaders, as HR, as change agents, and simply as humans. I'm inviting you here for discoveries and insights. All recording and materials are available at www.astepahead.pro. I'm so glad that you are listening to my podcast. With each episode, I try to make it as approachable, practical, and applicable as possible. I hope that you will like this episode too. In our conversation, we make many references to leaders and some challenges related to managing diversity and creating inclusive workplaces that the leaders face in their daily practice. So if you think of a leader that might benefit from applying a bit of diversity competence onto her or his practice, please do share this episode on. I will be very grateful for you doing this. And stay tuned for more. More and more frequently, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's certainly a very relevant topic, a topic that we want to be a little bit more knowledgeable about, but also a topic, an area where we want to be a little bit more functionable in. My impression is that we get a lot of DEI guidelines, DEI meaning diversity, equity, and inclusion, but very seldom they really show us how to behave in a specific situation. So this is why I'm very glad to be having Magdalena Szumna with me today, and we are going to explore a little bit more practical approach to dealing with situations related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Magda, welcome in the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me, Monika. Glad to be here.
Magda, you are currently an expert in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But how did you arrive in this area? As far as I know, your way was not taking you directly into this area. So it's an interesting story. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Yes, of course. After over 18 years of my working life in international organizations, in both local market and global roles, the last 10 of which I've spent in the Netherlands, where I work and live. I'm Polish originally, but have moved here, close on to a decade ago now. I have founded Indigo Diversity Consulting. It's a training and consulting company that offers bespoke learning programs in the areas of diversity competence and intercultural communication. And in the last years of my corporate career, I have been active in the topic of diversity and inclusion as a member of He4She team. That's the employee resource group operating within the broader United Nations created movement for gender equity. And as an intercultural communication trainer. So I was involved in initiatives addressing the cultural diversity in my organization where, on a daily basis in the office, I worked with colleagues from over 80 different countries, not to mention, of course, the cooperation with the markets, all the, colleagues in the local teams with which and for whom, as the so-called global headquarters, I build marketing strategies. So the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, as it's often shortened, is close to my heart for at least several reasons.
Absolutely. And when I'm thinking about the environment, there's so many nationalities in one office and so many offices locally which you've been in touch with. That's really amazing. Now, I think it also made you face situations where you were, dealing with diversity or facing a behavior different than yours, and maybe asked yourself this question, okay, so what do I do now? What's the best way? How to make it sustainable? So let's talk about this today. We certainly have been hearing about diversity, equity, and inclusion a lot, but from your perspective, why is it important to deal with it?
Yeah, of course. Diversity competences, in my opinion, are effectively the key competencies in today's world. Competencies not only of leaders, but also of all of those who communicate with people who are different from themselves. So, well, practically all of us, right? There is a lot of talk about DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion at the level of systemic changes. Those, that regard organizational management policies, be that employment policies or compensation policies, your gender parity in management boards and so on, so on. And that is great. We still have a lot of work to do here, certainly. But I do have an impression that less often or less time is spent on building the necessary competencies of people in the organization so that they are able to implement those policies in their everyday life and work. And we should act on both levels. So because, it's only paired with those competencies that the DEI systemic change efforts have a chance to actually make a difference. So, from over the decade of my own experience and observations, as I mentioned in my introduction, I know that even the best designed systemic changes have no chance of bringing the expected results unless time is invested in preparing the teams in their implementation, everyday work, and equipping them with those sort of competencies which basically make it natural, or I would say, embedded in everyday life to foster an inclusive and equitable culture in everyday conversations.
Absolutely. This is what I'm meeting very frequently in my job. Some companies, some organization might be having even very elaborate DEI strategies and policies, but the fact is that there is no goodwill missing among the managers or employees, but there is no capacity, there are no skills, there is no competence to actually understand. So what do I do on a practical level? So what is this diversity competence that we are, searching for, that we are longing for? How would you define that?
Yeah, indeed. And that's exactly the place in which I think those sort of programs, I'm obviously not the only person who works with this type of frameworks, but I think this is exactly why the focus on that everyday interaction level and building the competencies needed in them is so critical. When you ask what are they, at first glance, one might be tempted to say that diversity competences are not, that different from interpersonal competencies, right? We are talking about communication skills between people in the end. And there's a lot of truth in this. The problem, I guess, or the challenge here is that most of us in the process of socialization, so, when we learn those interpersonal skills, we learn them in quite homogeneous groups to which we belong. Often many of those groups at the same time, be that our family, our school, later on, of course, our work. And the concept that I work with, which I believe is quite helpful in understanding the complexity of communication in diversity, with diversity, comes from the thinking of intercultural competence, indeed, and its various models. But in this case, it offers somehow or somewhat of a broader perspective. It does not focus specifically on cultural diversity, which makes kind of, point of focus or takes a closer look at the macro level, the patterns and the tendencies that occur in a group or national culture in many instances, but instead takes the micro perspective. So kind of zooms in on a specific interaction between specific people with all their complexity and diversity, with all the cross-sectional unique elements that make up their identity, such as, well, you name it, right? Gender, age, skin color, the role in which they play in any given interaction, or as well the cultural context, of course. So in this sense, it is kind of guided a bit, maybe provocatively, by the statement, cultures don't meet, people do. And this is actually a subtitle of the book of diversity competence we talked before about. And this is, I would say, a resource which I hope we can, of course, also link to the show notes under this episode. Diversity competence, cultures don't meet, people do, by Edwin Hoffman and Arjan Verdoren. I believe that the way they propose to look at diversity competence is very helpful.
So the way I understand you is that diversity competence is the ability to use my interpersonal skills in situations where this diversity is heavily involved. Is this correct, what I'm saying?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Okay. I really like this concept of zooming out and zooming in. You know that the little corner of diversity and equity and inclusion where I come from is more around intercultural communication. And I've seen a lot of this high-level research on, how society societies, how people of certain national origin are similar or different to each other. At the same time, I think this research, even though very interesting and useful, might have been missing this zooming in. And I think also Anna Fuchs has been proposing it in her book on transculturality. Maybe for some people it's a new word, intersectionality, meaning that we have like many layers, yes, many aspects of us that play a role together, not only the national culture, not only the generation, not only the skin color, which might sometimes be at the focus of some diversity management strategies. And it's okay. And at the same time, it's just an aspect of a very multifaceted reality. So I really like that. So how do we work with this diversity competence? How do we, invite it into our daily practice?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, in this particular instance, or looking at that methodology, if you like, and of course, by no means is it the only one out there. The model that diversity competence I work with, and as I said, found very helpful, is based on or kind of taps into, it's called TOPOI. TOPOI from topos, Greek for place. And it's also an abbreviation, as you can imagine, of a set of lenses through which we can view a specific interaction. And there's, I would say, a framework of 5 lenses for the 5 letters of TOPOI. Each of them allows us to exactly that, zoom in on a particular interaction from a little bit different perspective. So the first one, T, for tongue. So that one refers to verbal and nonverbal language. In this instance, what we look at is how verbal and nonverbal communication or language and the meanings that people assign to given elements impact the particular interaction, right? So are we speaking the same language? Are we speaking the same language as not our native language? Which is, I guess, for example, a case in today's conversation between you and I, right? We both speak English, but it's not our mother tongue.
Absolutely. And I can see so many patterns where I'm just using the English vocabulary, but I'm using the patterns of my mind translated from my native language into the English language. I even noticed that when I talk English internationally with international colleagues, they understand me, they seem to understand me quite well. But my native English speaking colleagues, British or American, seem to be lacking understanding of some little pieces of what I'm saying. And I guess it might be about those patterns, yes, the copy-paste. I have just been to a conference for podcasters, and it's been an International Podcaster Day, and I met a lot of people who either do podcasts, just like me, or who think about having their own. And among those, I met a lady who is a teacher of English as a foreign language, and she is having this temptation, this desire, even this urge, launch a podcast because she gets so many questions about what's the right way to express myself in English. Yes. So how do I put my message through? So it's really a combination of the language fluency in itself, but also of the ability of using specific vocabulary for specific context. I fully resonate with this. So that's the T in TOPOI. Yes. The tongue, the language, the first letter.
Both the patterns in the language you mentioned, but also the nonverbal communication. And equally, also, when we talk about organizational culture, to step away a little bit from only the references to, I would say, national or intercultural lens, is how many shortcuts or how many, abbreviations do you use? A lot of organizations have like their internal slang, which can be, very exclusive and kind of excluding towards people who might, for example, be the newcomers joining an organization. So
I'm laughing because...
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
That's exactly the area of tongue that's where, a lot of the interactions which we can look at or exactly zoom in can be impacted by.
I'm laughing because that's precisely what I'm thinking about some aspects of the DEI, community or, DEI language. So meeting fellow podcasters means that you also meet people, some of them record about a beauty parlor. Yes. The place you go to make your hair, to take care about your skin. Some of them talk about the AI. Some of them talk about art, and make interviews with artists. And when I was asked what I record my podcast about, yes, I was talking about this intercultural cooperation, about, leading and managing. And by the time when I was mentioning the DEI, even using the word diversity, most people were giving me a blank gaze. What is this? So I think working in this area, we sometimes might become a little bit too much of self-confident that other people understand our language, the tongue. A very good remark about the nonverbal communication also from your side. Okay, and what's the second letter from this model?
Yes, so the second lens stands for O, order. And that talks to the opinions and the logic of each person in the interaction. So again, looking at how our starting points in a conversation might differ. What is the different logic that we bring to the conversation? And that again, it can translate to diversities stemming from, our cultural backgrounds, but also, for example, people coming from two different departments in the organization, right? How often we see those perspectives being very different. The third one stands for P, so persons, and that talks to the lens which zooms in on the way in which each party of the interaction sees themselves and the other side, so the other party in the interaction in a given relationship. So, for example, whether they are in subordination or kind of any hierarchical relationship, or whether they are peers. Right? Interaction might look very differently when two colleagues from the team talk, and might look very differently when, say, the top management interacts with someone who is much lower in a hierarchy in the organization.
Indeed. Sometimes you immediately get stressed just because of their position, not because your personality or the way they contact you.
Absolutely. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be an actual discrepancy. It is, as I just said, about a perception. So do I perceive you somehow at a different position to myself? Or do I perceive you or do I come to the interaction with some sort of assumptions about how different you are from myself, or how different our viewpoints might be? The fourth lens out of the five, so the other O in TOPOI, stands for organization. And that talks to the lens in which you look at possible differences in knowledge of, the positions, the rules, the procedures, and any other organizational aspects which may play the role at the level of our interaction. So again, the fluency in understanding the rules that are at play. And again, a great example of that is newcomer to an organization and someone who's been functioning within the organization for many, many years, right?
I'm currently working in a project where there are some tensions between local sites in a country and the headquarters, which is located in another country. And would this be relating to this aspect of O?
Yes, we could definitely look at this.
Mm-hmm.
We could definitely look at it through the lens of the organization, or perhaps, a mix of. Neither of those lenses is excluding the other. And as you already would have concluded, they have a certain overlap, right? So those gray areas in which, of course, you can interpret one or the other way. And the last
TOPO and I.
Mm-hmm. Right? The last lens, so TOPOI, I stands for intentions. By recognizing your interlocutors or your partners in the interaction motives, feelings, needs, again, those hidden assumptions and values, we can understand why they behave the way they do. This one is, I guess, in my view, probably the most complex in a sense of it touches on things which are very often not explicit. And of course, again, none of the interactions would be zooming in or in situations we would be taking under the lenses of TOPOI would be explainable, or I would say understandable, with only one of those lenses. You can definitely think about it as a set of lenses that explains the interaction. The main advantage of this thinking, in my opinion, is that it gives the opportunity to create a little bit of space in those reflections. And it is a bit like, I would use a comparison to, it's a bit like a muscle that becomes more and more fit with training. So until, you don't necessarily have to think consciously about, each of those lenses as you interpret an interaction or as you are in the interaction itself, it becomes kind of a second nature to be keeping those different lenses in mind. And this way, of kind of zooming in on the interaction instead of, like we said before, trying to explain it only by zooming out on those big general patterns that could be at play. I like to think about it, instead of strengthening the sense of kind of othering and looking at, these people from this particular group act this way because, instead of kind of entrenching, as it were, in a kind of us versus them, if you know what I mean, it brings us closer and allows us to see the other side as a person with those particular lenses that we've just talked about.
Absolutely, I resonate with you fully. I can see sometimes it's just so heavy to imagine I am a Polish, she is a German, and because of this, there are tensions between us. No, it really blocks. It's not really helpful. So I really like this idea of zooming in. Can you please give us a few examples how to work with this set of lenses, how to work with this TOPOI approach?
I can share with you an example or a story from my long professional life working in very diverse environments, like we talked about in the beginning. I think, maybe as a word of introduction, the challenges of working in diverse environments. And of course, you can look at them from, I would say, two different groups of those challenges. One is, of course, the frustrations and potential conflicts that result from the difference in behavior, which is, considered a so-called a common sense or a norm for one person and isn't so for the other one, which, of course, often comes down to the differences at the level of values. So the intention lens, as we just discussed. But often, I think, too quick interpretation of the difference and the cause of the tension and explaining them as indeed those cultural differences. Oh, because, they are like that and now we have to somehow tolerate it, right? Or not. To your example, or, because in Germany they do things this way and therefore it's so frustrating or not. I don't find it a very helpful perspective, which not only, of course, does not give much room to maneuver. I mean, if they are like that and we are like this.
And it activates all the stereotypes, and I think it's just heavy. Yes, it's a burden.
And it often turns out to be, a completely wrong interpretation because it's based on very often stereotypes or generalized, ideas of what the other group or that person as a representative of the other group, right, brings into conversation. So that example, just to come back to your question, is the first couple of years of my collaboration with my close colleagues. So in my team, I had a colleague where for the first, and I wouldn't exaggerate saying for the first probably couple of years of our work, pretty much every meeting or interaction would leave us both with this strange feeling of, something is off. Like, you cannot put your finger on, but somehow we just could not find the flow in our collaboration. We both spoke English as a foreign language, so not as our first mother tongue, I would say. Both very fluently. So again, to our beginning of our conversation, I don't think there was an issue necessarily from a fluency point of view. My native being Polish, her native language being Dutch. So again, if we take the T as the first lens to zoom in, of course, we could think of whether the fluency of the language could play a role. But more so, what is the meaning of silence and taking breaks in conversation? And I recognize that for a long, long time, I would be super annoying and super, I would say, intrusive from a perspective of my colleague, as I would, every moment that she paused for thought or, took a longer break, I would jump in. I would throw in the word. I would give her a suggestion, or I would be so excited in a desire to kind of show my interest and involvement in a topic that I would just involuntarily interrupt. And what from, again, in the lens of every intention was to show that, interest in the topic and, how excited I am of what you're saying. And look at that was, of course, perceived as being intrusive, as not listening, as distracting and kind of trying to hijack a conversation almost. So you can see how speaking a common language, but how those elements of nonverbal communication, or in this particular case, a role of silence and a break can break an interaction.
That's very interesting. So from this example, I understand that initially it might not be fully clear which lens of TOPOI to apply. Maybe you need to go through all the 5 to look for some hints, to look for some, okay, which might be the right one to explore. Here I'm hearing the level of language, yes, the tone, meaning that also using the silence, and the intentions, yes, which were misunderstood on both sides, probably.
They would be the most relevant. It's not to say that, in every interaction, all 5 lenses actually provide a valid interpretation, and they by no means have to be used in the order of appearance in the model. But indeed, of course, depending on the situation, let's say there was a bit of an organizational context which play a role in that particular interaction as well. I don't know, she was a manager from a different team, so in a kind of hierarchical setting towards me, or the other way around, I would be superior versus her in terms of my seniority, not necessarily even direct reporting. Right? That would already provide some additional insight on that interaction. Who interrupts whom and why? And is it less or more tolerable? And therefore, of course, is it considered as disruptive as it isn't? And by whom? So all those different elements, as you would say, peel off those layers of the situation, and depending how far you want to go in the interpretation, each of those lenses provides context.
So how would you suggest to address such a situation after it happens, after some kind of a situation happens? Shall I just sit myself down with the 5 lenses and just do a little bit of reflective exercise, yes? So which lens might it have been? Or would you rather propose to address the other person and to go through the lenses together? What might be the right way?
I think both. Both routes are equally helpful, as in, again, depending on the context, and of course, also the fluency in understanding the approach in itself. I mean, in my ideal world, of course, everyone would have a certain self-awareness, and that they would be able to step back and say, what's happening here, right? So let's actually take a bit of a distance from that particular situation and be aware of those different elements that could be at play, either preparing for a conversation or actually being in the conversation, and at least after, to reflect and go, oh, okay, that was interesting. This is what I've learned about myself. This is how, these things which are important for me came out in this conversation. And it is a beautiful conversation starter to have the next interaction and to say, last time we interacted, I kind of observed this and this in myself. How about you? Or, I think because this and this particular context plays here, maybe what I said might have not been, might have not come across the same way as I intended it to be. Let's talk about our intentions, or, what we believe, or what we actually are striving here for.
So it also bases on the assumption that we are, let's say, open enough to talk about that. But I guess without the willingness on both sides, you can hardly achieve outcomes.
Absolutely. And I think, we haven't talked about it in length, but, as we talk about competence overall, diversity competencies, as we framed them, they are, of course, as any competence, built from those 3 elements, right? The element of knowledge about, the different culture, about the social and cultural context in which the person we interact with sits. And I mean context, not only cultural, but also organizational, like we said. What's happening in their life? Where are we? Are we in a private setting? Are we in a professional setting? All of those aspects, of course, are element of knowledge, and how those elements impact the interaction. Then we have the level of skills. We talked about, language proficiency, our emotional skills or interpersonal skills overall, right? And ability to communicate clearly. And the last one, but not the least important by far, is the attitude or the mindset. And that's exactly what you touched on, which is, what beliefs do I have about this interaction, right? Am I open? Do I have curiosity, or rather a lack of interest and reluctance towards the person? And that will, of course, have a huge impact on the outcome of the interaction.
This sounds really interesting. So what another case could we look at to get a little bit more practice in applying TOPOI?
Another case I could think of, and it is actually something that is inspired by actually one of the cases by the authors in the aforementioned book. Let's say we look at a situation between an employee, a team member who comes to the manager and asks for a day off on Fridays. doesn't want to work on Fridays and motivates the ask or the request that he has to go to the mosque. In the context of everyone everyone else in the team who works regularly on Fridays, automatically the manager may think, oh gosh, I can't let him because other team members will work, we work here in this organization, everyone is expected to work on Fridays. But I don't know how to go about it. Because, if I say that, I might seem intolerant or worse, even, be accused of discriminating based on religion. Your mind immediately might go into all of those thoughts, right? And I guess looking at it from a TOPOI perspective, or what diversity competence invites us to do, is instead of reducing the situation to the conflict, or I would say a clash of religions, of cultures, such as, we are here, for example, in a context, of me living in Amsterdam, Dutch or Protestants, and they are, Muslims. And, therefore my American colleagues need something else. TOPOI invites you to look at all the elements of identity and actually zoom in on that one that's most relevant in this particular situation. And from the organization's point of view, it is the interaction between an employee and a superior and supervisor, right? A manager. First of all, they are at work relationship. Simple as that. And they should first refer to that context as applicable in this situation. And it somehow, I feel, then restores a bit of an agency to both parties and gives the opportunity to kind of, exchange and a bit of and negotiate a satisfactory solution. Maybe, it will be a shorter working day or a day without meetings, which makes it a bit more flexible working hours that, the employee can incorporate their needs and whatever their private life or private sphere of life asks of him. And yet, in the same time, be able to fulfill the obligations that the person has towards the organization. And it kind of breaks, I feel, the deadlock that purely a cultural approach can introduce, this freeze of, oh my God, what do I say now? There's a cultural difference. And we kind of freeze in the face of that and don't really know how to approach. So again, to look at the TOPOI model as not only a tool to interpret what's happening, but to look at it from those different lenses and then pick a bit of a intervention, or I would say a solution that can be informed, like in this particular case, by the organizational lens, and take it from there.
I really like it because having 5 specific perspectives, 5 specific lenses can really help us look, put a little bit order into our reflection on a situation, yes, and try to understand where we are seated, what might be the issue, at which level we want to focus on. So I find it really helpful in this sense. The question could be, how can we possibly develop this competence of applying TOPOI, develop this diversity competence?
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about developing those competencies, we talk about obviously the formal methods like trainings, lectures, as well as, learning in everyday life throughout experience. So, the scope of the training or learning programs may vary greatly depending on the needs or readiness of the organization, from, a series of lectures or webinars that last, several hours, where we focus on the knowledge element of the competence, all the way through, workshops, kind of more hands-on sessions where, additional to the knowledge, we can also develop some of the skills we talked about, so kind of work on practical case studies that are relevant to the particular group that we work with. For example, working on a specific real-life situations that occur in the team. And lastly, working on the attitude or the mindset I mentioned is a bit of a longer-term endeavor, right? And again, it depends on where the given organization is on its path. Of course, attitudes such as openness to other people, curiosity of the perspectives, respect are promoted and, of course, appreciated in this context. I mean, it's only with those that can you actually step into those interactions with that view. And of course, in this particular element of competencies, the role modeling by the leaders and the management boards is key. You can't expect, or you will never see, certain behaviors in the organization lived and breathed truly if it's not behavior and kind of a way of being that is embraced and modeled by the leadership.
Absolutely. We watch our environment and we see, so how is it really approached in practice? I think really that the 5 lenses of the TOPOI can give a practical hint, a practical guideline on how to approach specific situations, how to look at specific situations. Now, while listening to you, I've been also thinking about this little project that I'm in currently. The ask in this project is about a Polish-German cooperation, but from what I'm hearing in the interviews, which I'm making to understand what's really happening for people, is that there are no Polish-German tensions. The tension really is more between a headquarter and a distant site, with the question where the decisions are taken and what's the decision-taking style. Yes, so it's more about that. And now having the 5 layers, the 5 lenses of TOPOI can be helpful in understanding each specific relationship, working relationship, and a perspective of each person that I've been talking to so far. So thank you very much, Magdalena. What would you like to give us as your closing message in, applying diversity competence and, making the best use of it?
Thank you very much, Monica, for this beautiful conversation and enriching examples from your side as well. I guess my closing message is it's not about anything else but truly looking at another person as a human being. And I think this is the beauty of the whole DEI work, but specifically when we talk about developing, competencies required to do better, to foster more inclusive and equitable environments. It is all about stepping away from the othering and labeling and stereotyping, but really focusing on humanizing otherness and on looking at the other person with the whole complexity of different intersecting elements of their identity.
After all, we are also different to other people, yes?
So absolutely. Absolutely.
The way we are perceived is also... I think we all benefit from the approach that you have just recommended. Thank you so much for talking today, Magda. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Three main conclusions that I'm taking along as outcomes from this conversation with Magdalena are: firstly, look at each situation from various angles. And TOPOI might offer an interesting perspective here. Secondly, check on your own intentions and fears in facing a particular situation or a person. And thirdly, in case anything is a bit troublesome to you, talk to another person to double check for your own assumptions. I'm also thinking of many cross-cultural trainings which we deliver as a company. Sometimes our audience likes to attribute a bit too much to just the cultural difference. Taking a bit of TOPOI into consideration might certainly be helpful for some of our audiences too. You will find all the notes to this podcast episode at www.astepahead.pro/012. 12 is the number of this episode. I also encourage you to use the same portal, to use the same website, to join the newsletter so that you can be informed about every new content that's coming up. And if you are a user of LinkedIn, you might want to join A Step Ahead by Monika Hutnik. That's the name of the profile, to see some of the background photos, some of the new topics that are coming up in recordings. And if you like to dive a bit into the area of inclusion and diversity, there are plenty other episodes that might be interesting for you. And I especially recommend 3 of them. A Step Ahead 003. So you go into astepahead.pro/003, psychological safety in a virtual team, 4 steps to mastery, an excellent conversation with Katarzyna Romanowicz, where we talk about something without which diversity is not possible at all. The psychological safety starts from inclusion and it brings the teams to those great results that we frequently talk about. What are micro affirmations is another topic of a podcast episode, and why you want to have them in your team. Absolutely, it can help you also with psychological safety. And we have a conversation with Ben Capel, while we focus especially on virtual teams working together. That's an episode number 4. So you go into /004. And finally, quite a recent episode where I'm talking to Maja Nenadovic on depolarizing dialogue. I think that's such a skill that we never need to stop practicing if we are able to apply this at all. And that's an episode number 11. So /011. Well, I wish you successful discovery of diversity, and for today, take care and goodbye.